The market for collectible goods has been booming in recent years. Last week, for instance, a Ferrari sold for almost $10 million. I'm Matthew Valencia, the Special Assignments Editor at The Economist. And with me to discuss an article he's written about our new Valuables Index is James Francham. So, James, what is a collectible? What sort of things are we talking about here?
It's a very kind of broad term that we're using to basically encompass anything that's quite rare and quite expensive. So classic cars, as you mentioned, vintage wine, fine art, and even classic guitars and violins.
And do we have a sense of which of these are the most sought after goods?
It's difficult to say because a lot of this is purchased privately. About 10.5 billion of art was sold at auction last year. The market for vintage wine is estimated at near 5 billion. And Haggerty, a car insurer, estimate there are about 10 million pre-1972 cars, that's classic cars, globally.
And what's your sense of why these assets, broadly speaking, are doing so well these days? Are people moving out of the stock market and other asset classes into these because of low yields elsewhere or for other reasons?
That's partly an explanation. I think it's an inflation hedge. While central banks are printing money, I think high net worth individuals are prepared to invest in physical assets, and gold is one of those examples, but I think cars and art and wine do come into that realm too. Another factor is just the enormous amount of high net worth individual wealth. Capgemini, a consultancy, estimate there to be 46 trillion of wealth among high net worth individuals. And another thing is just the rise of the emerging market. So as I mentioned, China have been heavy investors into wine in recent years, but also into art too.
Right, now, so you've looked at this because you've compiled an index for us and written about it, a Valuables Index. Mm-hmm. Tell us, first of all, how you went about doing that.
Basically, I gathered or collected a number of kind of recognised indices covering art and wine and cars. And I weighted these according to high net worth individuals' exposure to these assets as reported by Barclays Wealth. So for example, the index is weighted quite heavily to art, 36% to art, 25% to classic cars and so forth. We've called the index the Valuables Index, and it's increased some 170% over the past 10 years and about 50% since 2008. And it's outperformed a broad global stock market index, which would include reinvested dividends.
So if you'd invested in global stocks over that period, you wouldn't have done as well as if you'd invested in the classic cars, the art and the guitars and violins.
Potentially, but the comparison is misleading. Obviously, our index doesn't include the storage, the maintenance, the insurance, the transaction cost to buy into this market. Obviously, the MSCI Global Stock Market Index is very liquid. It's traded daily. And it doesn't cost you anything to hold a share certificate, for example. It doesn't need any polishing.
Are these volatile asset classes when compared with stocks, compared with bonds, compared with your more traditional financial products? Do they tend to swing around a lot more? Are there more risks in that respect?
Our index, we've run it on a quarterly basis and isn't terribly volatile, but some indices are volatile. And quite frankly, I think our index is very broad and wouldn't necessarily capture that volatility. You'd I think have to be quite lucky to invest and get it right each time.
And what's been the best type of collectible, the best type of valuable in terms of looking over the last few years? What's performed best? Classic
cars have done outstandingly well, but other indices haven't done so well. Vintage wine has had an enormous bubble caused by a lot of interest from China. And fine art is fairly fickle. So some types of art have done extremely well, others haven't. So that market has been quite volatile in recent years.
If I can just finish up by asking you, if you had to invest today, would you be investing in the stock market or in these valuables?
Well, I don't think you should take our Valuables Index too seriously. It's a light-hearted look at investing in valuables and alternative assets, as it were. I don't think our Valuables Index could ever replace the stock market, where you clearly have liquidity and transparency.
James, thank you very much indeed for talking with us.
The Economist.